If you just finished Space Marine 2, spent 15 hours chainsawing through Tyranids as Lieutenant Titus, wondering why everything in this universe feels so irreparably broken, or if you just downloaded Rogue Trader and you're wandering through a galaxy that runs on suffering and incense, this is the story that explains all of it. Every cathedral built on a mountain of skulls, every fanatical prayer screamed into the void, traces back to one figure. The Emperor of Mankind made 20 superhuman sons, lost them when the Chaos Gods scattered them across the galaxy as infants, never raised a single one, then showed up decades later demanding total obedience from the strangers they'd become. Half of them tried to kill him. And, honestly, when you hear what he did to them, you'll understand why. So, the Emperor. He's ancient, a psychic entity born tens of thousands of years before any of this, supposedly the product of thousands of human shamans pooling their souls into one immortal being. By the 30th millennium, Earth, called Terra, was a radioactive wasteland of warring techno-barbarian kingdoms. He unified it through conquest, diplomacy, and a staggering amount of violence, then launched something called the Great Crusade to reunify every human colony scattered across the stars. He needed generals for that crusade, not ordinary generals, demigods. Deep beneath the Himalayas, in gene laboratories so classified that even his closest advisors didn't fully understand what was happening inside, the Emperor created 20 Primarchs. 20 transhuman beings forged from his own genetic material, each engineered to be stronger, faster, smarter, and more charismatic than anything that had ever lived. They weren't born, they were manufactured. Each one was built with specific capabilities for specific purposes. Commanders for 20 Space Marine legions, the greatest military force the galaxy had ever seen. Tools of conquest wrapped in the shape of suns. He gave them names, gave them the trappings of fatherhood, but the relationship was transactional, from the very first cell that divided in those gene vats. He needed conquerors. He built conquerors. Whether calling them sons was self-deception or manipulation, the lore never quite lets you decide. But he didn't get to raise any of them. Before the Primarchs were mature enough to leave the labs, the Chaos Gods, malevolent sentient forces inhabiting the psychic dimension called the Warp, ripped the infant Primarchs from their gestation pods and flung them to random planets across the galaxy. 20 pods, 20 infants, 20 unknown worlds. Gone. The Emperor's reaction is one of the most telling silences in all of Warhammer lore. There's no account of grief, no record of desperation. He adjusted his plans. He still had each Primarch's genetic template, so he used those to create the Space Marine legions, lesser copies of each Primarch's DNA, implanted into regular human recruits. The crusade would proceed. The sons were lost, and the project continued. That prioritization, mission over children, is the original sin. Everything that follows is just the interest compounding. The Primarchs grew on their scattered worlds with supernatural speed, reaching adult size by their early teens, possessing genius-level intellect from infancy. Each was shaped by whatever culture and trauma their random homeworld inflicted. They became warlords, philosophers, tyrants, liberators, monsters, and saints, all without any knowledge of their true origin. They were strangers to the Emperor and strangers to each other. Then, one by one, as the Great Crusade pushed outward, the Emperor found them. He arrived on each world like a god descending from heaven, told these fully formed adults that he was their father and they'd been made for a purpose, and expected obedience. Immediate, unquestioning, total. From people who'd already lived entire lives, built entire identities, and survived entire wars without him. He showed up to collect his tools and expected the tools to be grateful. Take Angron of Nuceria. Angron landed on a brutal world where he was enslaved and forced into gladiatorial combat. His slavers surgically implanted devices called the Butcher's Nails into his brain, crude archaeotech that amplified his aggression while destroying his capacity for any emotion except rage, literally eating his brain one synapse at a time. Despite all that, Angron became a leader. He rallied his fellow gladiator slaves into rebellion, fought toward freedom, and was cornered on a mountain with his comrades, outnumbered, preparing for a last stand alongside the only family he'd ever known. The Emperor arrived with an entire fleet in orbit. He had the military capability to save every single one of those rebels. Instead, he teleported Angron, and only Angron, off the mountain and onto his ship. Every one of Angron's comrades was slaughtered while he watched from orbit, screaming. The Emperor handed him a legion of space marines and essentially said, "Get to work." The butcher's nails slowly lobotomizing his son? The Emperor examined them and declared they were too integrated to remove, though persistent lore debate surrounds whether he simply chose not to because a rage-fueled Primarch was more useful as a weapon. Angron was given an army by a father who had just murdered his family through neglect. Somehow the Emperor expected loyalty. Perturabo of Olympia, a genius of fortification, a builder, an architect, got the worst assignments in the entire crusade. Every grinding, thankless, miserable siege nobody else wanted fell to Perturabo and his iron warriors. While Primarchs like Horus and Sanguinius received glory and praise, Perturabo dug trenches and broke walls and bled his legion white for objectives that earned nothing but the next meat grinder. He was the reliable son who always delivered. His reward was being taken for granted, day by day, siege by siege, by a father who treated his most dependable son as the one who could absorb the most punishment. Mortarion grew up on Barbarous, a nightmare world of toxic fog ruled by alien warlords who used sorcery to oppress the human population. He spent his entire life fighting up those poisonous mountains, fortress by fortress, becoming the embodiment of defiance against tyrannical overlords. He was within reach of killing the final warlord when the Emperor arrived, swooped in, killed the creature Mortarion had spent his whole life fighting, and robbed him of the one victory that mattered. Then this stranger in golden armor turned around and claimed fatherhood. Mortarion looked at the Emperor, a towering, psychic, all-powerful figure who demanded obedience from every world he visited, who crushed independence and imposed his will across an entire galaxy, and saw the exact same kind of tyrant he'd been raised to destroy. Conrad Kurz landed on Nostromo, a lightless hive world of perpetual crime and violence. No mentor, no foster family, no kindness of any kind. He developed precognitive visions of the future, all horrifying, and used terror as his only tool because terror was the only language Nostromo understood. When the Emperor found him, Kurz was already fragmenting psychologically, tormented by visions he couldn't control. He needed a father who'd acknowledge his suffering, address his psychic instability. The Emperor gave him a legion and pointed him at the next target. Kurz descended into madness, becoming exactly the kind of monster the Imperium should have been protecting people from. Fulgrim was possibly the cruelest slow burn of them all. Fulgrim's obsessive perfectionism consumed him, hollowed him out from the inside. During the Crusade, Fulgrim came into possession of the Layer Blade, a weapon housing a demon entity that promised transcendence. You could blame the blade, but the blade found purchase in a crack the Emperor had put there first. Fulgrim was engineered to chase a standard no one could meet, and his obsessive perfectionism left him vulnerable to exactly the kind of corruption that found him. Even the loyal sons carried fracture lines that traced straight back to their father, Sanguinius, the angelic Primarch of the Blood Angels. Perhaps the only son the Emperor seemed to genuinely love, hid a terrible genetic flaw in his legion that produced madness and bloodlust. He hid it because he was afraid the Emperor would exterminate his entire legion for being imperfect. That fear alone tells you everything about the Emperor's parenting style. The 2nd and 11th Primarchs are the most chilling evidence of all. They're completely expunged from imperial records, their names, legions, histories erased so thoroughly that even the other Primarchs rarely speak of them. Something happened to these two sons, and the Emperor's solution was total deletion from memory. Fatherhood as a ledger, where failed entries get redacted, and nobody asks questions because the custodies are standing right there. Chaos didn't ignite the heresy alone. The true accelerant was forged on Colchis. Lorgar Aurelian, Primarch of the Word-Bearers, grew up on a deeply religious world of temple cultures. Lorgar was, from his earliest memories, a creature of faith. He didn't just believe, he burned with belief. When the Emperor claimed him, Lorgar didn't merely obey, he worshipped. With every ounce of his supernatural charisma, he decided the Emperor was God, and spreading that worship was the highest purpose any being could serve. While other Primarchs conquered worlds through military force, Lorgar conquered them through conversion. He built cathedrals, wrote scriptures, composed entire theological frameworks around the Emperor's divinity. His compliance rate was slower than his brothers. You can't build true believers as fast as you can bomb a planet into submission. But what Lorgar built lasted. His worlds didn't rebel. His populations didn't need garrisons. They believed. The crown jewel was Monarchia, a perfect city on the world of Kur, raised from nothing into the most beautiful expression of human devotion the galaxy had ever seen. Every building was a hymn in stone. Every street was a processional. Lorgar's gift to his father, physical proof that love, not just force, could bring worlds into compliance. He looked at Monarchia and saw his life's work, validation, a son finally worthy. The Emperor looked at Monarchia and saw a problem. He'd established the imperial truth, mandatory rationalism, strict atheism. No gods, no religion. The universe was material, knowable, conquerable through science and reason. This wasn't a suggestion, it was policy enforced at gunpoint. Lorgar was in direct violation. A private correction would have sufficed, a conversation between father and son. But the Emperor didn't want correction. He wanted an example. He sent Rabute Gilliman's Ultramarines to Kur. They razed Monarchia to the ground, burned it, the cathedrals, the scriptural halls, every mosaic and altar and prayer-carved stone, reduced to ash and rubble. Then, in the smoking ruins of the most beautiful city his most devoted son had ever built, the Emperor made Lorgar kneel. He forced the entire Word-Bearers Legion, 100,000 transhuman warriors, to their knees in the ashes, with the Emperor's personal bodyguard, the Custodies, standing over them to enforce compliance. The Emperor told Lorgar, in front of his sons, in front of his brothers, surrounded by the wreckage of everything he'd ever loved, that he was wrong. The Emperor was no god. Everything Lorgar had built was a failure. Get up, conquer properly, or be replaced. Imagine spending your entire life building something to honor your father, and he burns it to the ground, forces you to your knees in the rubble, and tells you your love was the problem. In front of everyone you've ever led, Lorgar shattered. If the Emperor wasn't a god, then Lorgar's entire framework for understanding reality collapsed. If devotion was wrong, his very identity had been a mistake. But Lorgar needed to worship something. It was coded into his nature, possibly by the Emperor's own genetic design. His chaplain Erebus and his foster father Cor Ferron, both with secret ties to older faiths from Colchis, guided Lorgar on a pilgrimage into the Eye of Terror, the massive warp rift at the galaxy's heart. The Chaos Gods embraced what the Emperor had rejected. They told Lorgar they were real, that they wanted his worship, that his father had been lying. Lorgar fell to chaos for the simplest reason imaginable. The Emperor broke him and left a void that only gods could fill. And the hypocrisy surrounding all of this is staggering. The Emperor enforced strict atheism while being a psychic entity of functionally godlike power who sat on a psychic throne and projected his will across the galaxy. According to lore, he traveled through a gate on the world of Molech and struck some form of bargain with the Chaos Gods themselves to gain the power needed to create the Primarchs. He used warp sorcery, the thing he told his sons was dangerous and forbidden, as the foundation of his entire species-saving project. At the Council of Nicaea, he told Magnus the Red, his most psychically gifted son, that psychic powers were banned across all the legions. Sorcery forbidden. Librarians disbanded. Magnus, who'd built his entire legion's identity around psychic mastery, was told to stop being what the Emperor had made him to be. Magnus is the Primarch who proves that even trying to be a good son couldn't save you from this father. When Horus turned traitor, Magnus tried to warn the Emperor. The only way to reach Terra fast enough was through sorcery, through the warp, through the exact methods the Emperor had forbidden. So Magnus broke the ban to save his father's life. He projected a psychic message across the galaxy, and in doing so, he accidentally shattered the Emperor's Webway project, ripping a hole in the barrier between real space and the warp directly beneath the Imperial Palace. Demons poured through the breach. The Emperor's secret masterwork, the project he'd abandoned the entire crusade to complete, was ruined. Magnus had been trying to help. He'd violated his father's commandment to deliver a warning that could have stopped the heresy before it started. The Emperor's response was to send Leman Russ and the Space Wolves to destroy Prospero, Magnus's homeworld. Magnus, the loyal son who broke one rule to save everything, was pushed into enemy arms because his father answered loyalty with annihilation. Meanwhile, the Emperor allowed the Mechanicum of Mars to venerate him as the Omnissiah, the machine god incarnate. That was worship. That was religion. But it was useful religion, so it got a pass. Lorgar's worship was inconvenient, so Lorgar got Monarchia. Magnus's sorcery was forbidden, except when the Emperor used sorcery himself for the Webway project. The rules applied selectively, and every single Primarch was sharp enough to notice. Horus Lupercal was the favorite. Found first, or at least among the first, raised closer to the Emperor than any other Primarch, named War Master, supreme commander of all Imperial military forces. If any son had reason for loyalty, it was Horus. But even favorites aren't immune to abandonment. The Emperor abruptly left the Crusade to work on the Webway project without telling Horus why. Didn't explain what he was doing back on Terra. Just handed his favorite son ultimate military authority and vanished behind closed doors, leaving Horus without any support, guidance, or explanation from the one person who could have provided context. Even the favorite son was, ultimately, just another tool expected to function without maintenance. Erebus, Lorgar's agent, the man Monarchia created, engineered Horus's wounding on Davin's moon. Grievously wounded and dying, Horus was taken to a serpent lodge on Davin's surface, a temple that was, in truth, a chaos shrine, where he experienced a vision of the future, the Imperium of the 41st millennium, a rotting theocracy where the Emperor was worshipped as a god, while humanity stagnated and suffered. The vision told him the Emperor had always planned this, that everything, the Crusade, the Primarchs, the Grand Project, was a mechanism to install himself as a deity, and that fear had teeth. The Emperor had already created an earlier generation of super soldiers called the Thunder Warriors to unify Terra, and had them systematically killed once they'd served their purpose and were no longer needed. If the Emperor could discard one generation of transhuman warriors, the Primarchs were staring at a precedent. Horus looked at that future and saw the ultimate hypocrisy confirmed. The father who'd outlawed religion intended to become the god at the center of one. Whether the vision was true doesn't matter. It was believable. That's the point. Horus wasn't the first domino. Lorgar's humiliation created Erebus. Erebus engineered the corruption. Angron's bitterness, Perturabo's resentment, Mortarian's hatred of tyrants, Magnus's desperation, Kurz's madness, Fulgrim's perfectionism pushed past breaking. All of it was kindling the Emperor had spent decades stacking. Horus was just the match. Half the Primarchs turned traitor. Horus, Lorgar, Angron, Perturabo, Magnus, Mortarion, Conrad Kurz, and Fulgrim among them. The rest remained loyal: Sanguinius, Gilliman, Rogel Dorn, Leman Russ, Vulcan, Corvus Corax, Ferrus Manus, Jagatai Khan, and the Lion. The galaxy split in half along lines the Emperor himself had drawn through decades of neglect, favoritism, and hypocrisy. The killing started at Istvan III. Horus purged the loyalist elements within his own traitor legions, virus bombing an entire planet to kill space marines who wouldn't turn against the Emperor. Brothers killing brothers because their father had made a family where trust was impossible. Istvan V was worse. 7 traitor legions ambushed 3 loyalist legions in one of the most infamous betrayals in the lore, the Dropsite Massacre. Fulgrim personally killed his brother Ferrus Manus and took his head as a trophy. The heresy raged after that. World after world burned. Populations numbering in the billions were wiped out. The traitor fleet pushed toward Terra, and in the final siege, Horus's forces besieged the Emperor's palace on Earth itself. The Emperor teleported aboard Horus's flagship with a strike force that included Sanguinius, the angel, the most beloved son. Sanguinius confronted Horus first, and Horus killed him. The Emperor found his favorite son standing over the body of his best son, fully consumed by chaos. And even then, the Emperor hesitated, held back. Some accounts say he still loved Horus. Some say he was searching for a way to save him. It was only when Horus killed a random mortal, a lone custodian, or in some versions an ordinary human soldier, that the Emperor saw the totality of what his son had become and unleashed his full psychic might. He destroyed Horus utterly, but at the cost of his own body. He was placed on the Golden Throne, where he has sat for 10,000 years, neither alive nor dead, sustained by the daily sacrifice of thousands of psychers fed into the machine to keep his corpse functioning. 10,000 years later, the Imperium is everything the Emperor swore to destroy. A theocracy that worships him as a god, exactly what he forbade. A fascist nightmare of superstition, xenophobia, and stagnation, where the ecclesiarchy, a galaxy-spanning church devoted to his divinity and one of the most powerful institutions in imperial governance, would have made Lorgar weep with vindication. The imperial truth, the Emperor's enforced atheism, is dead and forgotten. Lorgar, the humiliated son, the one kneeling in ashes, essentially won the philosophical argument. The entire Imperium worships the Emperor just as Lorgar always wanted. They just do it under a different banner. Every golden Aquila you see in Space Marine 2, stamped on every bolter, branded on every banner, every shrine and reliquary and hymn, that's Monarchia, rebuilt on a galactic scale. The father who outlawed religion became the god of the most fanatical theocracy in fiction. The father who demanded obedience got a galaxy of blind worship he can't even speak to refuse. And somewhere on that golden throne, the worst father in fiction sits in the ruins of everything he built. Just like he made Lorgar kneel in the ruins of everything Lorgar built. One father, 20 sons. Half of them tried to kill him, and the other half inherited a galaxy shaped by his failures. That golden Aquila stamped on every piece of Imperial equipment, glowing on every loading screen in Space Marine 2 and Rogue Trader, now you know what it costs. Now you know whose mistakes you're carrying every time you pick up a bolter. If you want to go deeper into any of these sons, Magnus breaking the webway trying to warn a father who wouldn't listen, Sanguinius dying on Horus's ship knowing he'd never walk off it, Angron's rage echoing across 10,000 years, subscribe. There's a lot more to tell,